Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for dramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is episode 80, The Scottish Prisoner, week 12. Hello. I am seriously enjoying getting into this book in such detail. I love the little bits and pieces of history, where language comes from and phraseology just gives so much more depth than I've ever seen in this book before. And I'm really grateful to be going through this process with you. I think it adds dimension, and it adds to not only just who Jamie is and a foundation for Lord John Grey, but it really gives us so many bits and pieces for the regular Outlander series. So thank you for joining me week after week. We are now about halfway through the book. There are 43 chapters, and we still have another many weeks to go. So come on, let's get to chapter 23, Plan B. We know John's Plan A fell apart when Siverly stomped off muttering into the house, angry at him. And then Twelvetrees had words as well and had rage in his eyes and told John not to come back. So this is where we pick up. His Plan B is to go dressed in his full uniform, and Tom carefully helps him dress, and it's as if he's prepping for a battle. And he includes his dagger in the ensemble because he remembers what Siverly did to Jamie. And Jamie stands aside and watches as this goes on. He's a little miffed. He offered to go with John, but John declined. This made Jamie frown. John thought that Jamie could be a hindrance by further inflaming Siverly, and he thinks he has a tough enough job ahead as it is. John remarks to Jamie on the way out the door that Jamie can do whatever he wants to Siverly if he doesn't return. It's meant partially serious, mostly tongue-in-cheek. But Jamie takes it quite seriously, saying he will take the body back to Pardlow. This mortifies Tom, but John takes it in stride. And we don't see the trip to Glastuig, we just see him arriving. He knocks on the door and he formally approaches the butler, who was shocked to see him in uniform. Siverly apparently wasn't in the house, and the butler tells John that he's out at the summerhouse and to go look for him there. John heads toward the summerhouse, all under protestation of the butler. He thinks he would be fair and try to get Siverly to come voluntarily, but if not, he would return with an arrest warrant. The justiciar would help him if needed, or the constable, and send soldiers to escort them to the British Army. Now, that notion is predicated, of course, on Siverly staying put while John goes to get the warrant and return. Or he could simply arrest him on the spot with the help of Jamie and Tom, basically kidnap him by force. He knew Jamie, of course, would be happy to assist in that venture. He goes through the outcome of this possibility and collateral damage that might be present. Getting him onto a ship out of Ireland would be difficult, especially as a non-native tongue speaker as Siverly is. And he says to himself, "Needs must be when the devil drives." This means necessity compels. In current usage, this phrase is usually used to express something that is done unwillingly, but with an acceptance that it can't be avoided. For example, "I really don't want to cook tonight, but needs must, I suppose." The phrase is old. In earlier texts, it is almost always given in its fuller form. needs must when the devil drives. That is, if the devil is driving you, you have no choice. This dates back to the Middle English texts, for example, Assembly of Gods, circa 1500. He must needest go, that the duel drius. I don't think any of us would be able to properly converse with someone from the 1500s. The language is so different than today. Or if we woke up in Elizabethan England or Shakespearean England, we would be seen as complete outsiders, freaks, weirdos. We probably wouldn't get very far. So John reaches the Folly. Remember, it's an ornamental and extravagant building. He steps up to the stairs, and then he hears a noise from inside. He has a sense of unease, as in danger. His soldier's sense is piqued. Instinctively, he crouches without even thinking about it and listens intently. And then he hears a large rustling in the brush. He leaps up and runs toward the noise. He thinks it's Siverly he's pursuing, but he couldn't see the man, only he could hear him. He was sure he was heading to the stables, so he aimed to cut him off and veer left. Cue action music. Without bagpipes, what kind of action music would it be? Drums? Yeah, I'm sure there'd be drums. Servants were yelling at him from a distance. He paid no heed. He ran through the kitchen garden, leaping over things and even dodging the cook, who was mouth agape. He vaulted over the gate. I'm thinking John has very high levels of adrenaline and catecholamine right now. He's in flight or fight, and he's in fight mode, for certain. He runs around the rose bushes, and then the stables lie directly ahead. He opens the door, and it causes the horses to react, and they whinny and stamp. He believes Siverly is within. The guilty flee where no man pursueth. Proverbs 28:1, he thinks. Since Siverly, in John's mind, has flown, he is running away, John has cause now to arrest him without issue. Siverly was bigger than him, though, but John had the element of surprise on his side and a weapon. He then hears the door open behind him that he came through, and there stands a groom with a shovel and a pitchfork. And he's thinking he did not desire a witness, and a pitchfork carrying one at that. This groom comes toward John menacingly. They exchange words, and the groom asks Gray who he is, how he came to be in the stable. John explains the butler told him this is where Siverly was. John smartly decides to take his leave before he can be prodded with the pitchfork. He goes outside and he sees Siverly nowhere. Gray asks the groom if all the horses are accounted for, and then the groom goes into this long, drawn-out, meticulous story detailing the horses' names and where they are in the property, and John, exasperated, yells, "Saddle horses!" at the groom. The groom is a little surprised by this, but finally says there are none missing. This gives John an intense, strong sense of dread, as in danger, as in death, and he runs back toward the Folly. And when he gets there, he smells it before he sees it. There's blood. There's death here. And he steps forward, right into the blood. This causes him to slip, and he catches himself hard against the Folly railing. The whiff of death full-blown and reeking at his feet. So there is massive blood everywhere, back at the Folly. So he could not have been following Siverly over to the stables. It had to have been somebody else. I wonder who that could be. And we know John couldn't have killed Siverly. Is Twelvetrees anywhere around? We don't know. This gives me big eyes, and probably John had very big eyes as well. Throughout this whole chapter, I could hear 1970s or 1980s action music from detective shows. And I loved John's feeling of annoyance at the groom, and it had dark humor in it. It's different, this styling. It definitely feels more action and mystery oriented than the regular books. So this plan B obviously went to hell in a handbasket at somebody else's hands and at John and Siverly's expense. I also really enjoy the fact that the description of all the things that are living, including the servants that were about, in the garden, the bushes, the grass, all the things of life are everywhere, and now we have this dead body in the midst of all of it. Chapter 24, Clishmaclaver. That means gossip, idle, or foolish talk. Jamie had borrowed a pocket version of Homer's Iliad from Hal's library. A little bit of light reading for the road when he's bored. He thinks he hasn't read Greek in years. And he was so distracted and having a difficult time reading at the moment. The words in the book are from Alexander Pope's translation of Homer's Iliad from the Greek. Not thus the lion glories in his might, nor panther braves his spotted foe in fight, nor thus the boar, those terrors of the plain, man only vaunts his force and vaunts in vain. So this little section is saying that man is the only one that is like a rooster preening, telling of how awesome he is, sharing it with others. Jamie also remembers how he hadn't spoken Greek since Ardsmuir prison, when he would have dinner with John sometimes, and he was thinking of trading bits of Aristophanes over a rationed meal of ham and porridge. But it did include some good claret. I find it fascinating how Jamie can remember an entire meal, conversation. You could tell that educated people of the time, they were all schooled in the classics. That is something that fell out of favor not that long ago, and there are some schools who are trying to revive it, and you do have to take Latin every year. I think there's definitely usefulness to that, depending on what a student desires from education and where they plan on going as a career. But I will say I have no Greek and very little Latin. Jamie remembers doing the bidding of the prisoners as per usual. They played a very long game of chess that went well until dawn, and John ended up winning. And by gesture, John offered his office couch for Jamie to sleep the hour he had left before needing to rise with the other prisoners. Jamie declined and went back to the cell. He likes his touchstones and to attach memories to something else. I don't know if there's something in writing that can be attributed to. Some of you, I'm sure, would be able to tell me if it did. And he's sitting outside on a bench with this little book in his hand, and it's open on his lap, and it begins to rain, and drops begin to fall upon the open pages, and he says, "Merde." Now that is fascinating, because Jamie normally curses or exclaims in Gaelic. It's fascinating because John and his brother Hal, the Duke of Pardlow, often curse in other languages like German. So Jamie carefully wipes the page to make sure the ink doesn't run, closes the book, and puts it in his pocket. He makes his way back inside where Tom has been sitting helping Amara Beckett wind up her fresh dyed yarn and making moon face at her. Tom looks up as soon as Jamie enters. And he looks at Jamie with that eyeball conversation. And Jamie says back to him with a look, "No, John is not back." Tom then asks Miss Beckett what time it is. "About 3:30, so it is." She looks out the window as Jamie had as soon as Tom asked. The idea someone could not tell the time by the light was a foreign concept to her, clearly. But then Jamie thinks Tom was indeed a Londoner who was never out of earshot of church bells after all. Tom makes a comment about the nature of John's visit to his friend, and Jamie hopes it's definitely more cordial than the visit he'd had at Siverly's. But yet he had been gone a very long time, for 5 hours. That could be good or bad news. It was only a half-hour ride each way. Jamie decides to go upstairs. He tries to read again, but couldn't focus on the tragedy of Hector's ignominious death in the book. Hector also was John's first love and lover, who had died at Culloden. Interesting to hear of Hector again here. Jamie wasn't sure he would want to take Gray's body back to Pardlow. He's thinking Quinn's offer to cut and run sounded a whole lot better if it came to it. I wouldn't want to face Hal. And then he sees a man coming down the street, running, faster than he should be, looking a mess. And it wasn't John Gray. It was Tobias Quinn, of all people. He was pale, sweaty, and gasping for air. "I think you'd best come, Jamie. Your friend's killed Major Siverly, and the constable's after arresting him." "What? Where did Quinn come from? How does he know?" "He ran all that couple of miles." Yikes. It's not like he had good trainers or anything on, is it? Don't you think that's a question that begs to be asked? How in the heck would Tobias Quinn know instantly that John is being arrested for murder? The estate's quite large, and unless he was at the estate or outside nearby, he wouldn't see the constable or anything happening. He would never have heard that quickly. When Tom and Jamie arrived, there were a group of people on the lawn, and one of them, who looked quite sober, must have been the constable. And he sees John looking rather irritable, sitting in the middle of it all. And John did look a right mess. His hair had come down from its plait. There were mud smears on his uniform. Tom Bird will not care for that, Jamie thought automatically. And as soon as Tom sees it, he gives a squeak as he sees the state of John and his clothes. Jamie stayed out of sight to survey what was happening and how he could help best. He had to think a minute. He sees that John's hands were bound and his boots and breeks were covered in blood, not mud. No doubt you were hearing podcast cat Butterscotch in the background. She was being very much in a sense of upheaval, and I had to put her out. Normally she comes in and just lays down. Not tonight. She has playfulness on the mind. I think she was making a ruckus, so I'd let her go outside, but it's quite dark right now. Anyway, back to the story. Jamie notices that John is trying to speak loudly. He's trying to be heard over the clish-maclaver, but Jamie couldn't make out what he said. Gray turned away from the constable, shaking his head in disgust, and his eye caught Jamie. His face went from anger to calculation in an instant, and he made a brief, violent shooing gesture with one hand. "Go away," it said, clear as day. Tom wants to know what they're going to do with him. Jamie isn't sure, but since he's been arrested, he thinks he may go to the local jail. Tom is furious, and Jamie's trying to figure out what John would want him to do. So Jamie's starting to form a plan, and he sends Tom to be seen by John. He thinks since he's his servant, he will be able to get close to him, that the constable will allow it. And Gray did ease a bit when he saw Tom coming into view. There was much lengthy, unnecessary speech, which is a palaver, going on between the servants trying to keep Tom from Gray. Tom stood his ground, though, and the constable finally took notice and silenced the others. Magpies, they were called, just like the contents of the house, with an upheld hand. And he finally allows Tom to go speak to John. He tells the others to go away, but wants to speak to the person who found the body. A young maid was pushed through the group in front of him. She was scared and wide-eyed. His tone was meant to make her feel safe, but it caused her to shriek and back away. And a man came out of the group, probably her husband, and he came up beside her. He said she did find the body, and she was shocked out of her wits. "I see. Well, who the fuck else saw what happened? You?" The husband shrinks back at this. The maid cowers. But the constable's going to keep at it. And now the rain fell more heavily. Jamie could see that Tom was now next to John getting instructions from him. Jamie thinks in all the blubbering of the maid, he heard her say summerhouse is where the body was found. So he decides to go and investigate. He quietly leaves the shrubbery to go take a look. He made his way over and peered through the latticework, up on his tiptoes. The first thing he sees is the weapon used to murder Siverly. It's the same club Siverly had whacked him with. He crosses himself at the sight of it. Really in awe of God's sense of justice. I like his mind. He remembers Gray had told him from the description it was a war club made by the Iroquois. It's made of hard wood and could be wielded as a deadly weapon. Apparently, Siverly had run into someone who knew how to use it properly. And Jamie looks across the blood and spots Siverly's head. It was a terrible sight. So terrible, it nearly made Jamie vomit. I will say that is one hell of a weapon to stove somebody's head in, all the way to the brains leaking out. Ugh. And then he thinks there's not much to be learned here, so he goes back through the wood, around the house to the garden, in time to see John being taken away. John was sitting bolt upright, and he said something to the constable that caused the constable to glare at John as they set off. I love the words here. Jamie felt an angry spasm of kinship at the sight. He'd known such small cruelties when he'd worn fetters. He murmured a deliberate curse toward the constable and walked out onto the drive where the servants were clustered accusingly round Tom Bird. They all fell silent at the sight of Jamie, falling back a little. He ignored them and jerked his head at Tom. Come with me, Mr. Bird. So the two of them walked off together to words being spoken behind their back. Rather, accusing words being spoken behind their back. Tom thought they were going to go mob on him and hurt him if he hadn't come along right then. He was probably right. And Jamie explains to Tom that they're like dogs after their master died. They don't know what to do, so they howl and snap at each other. And he wants to know now what John had said to him. Tom was pale and excited, but had control of himself. He rubbed a sleeve across his face to wipe away the rain and settled himself to recite Lord John's message. I can picture him steeling himself. Right, sir. To begin with, the constable, the loud fat man, is taking his lordship to Castle Athlone. Aye, well, that's good. It's not? Jamie asked, seeing Tom shake his head. No, sir. He says the justiciar has gone to France, and whoever's in charge will either keep him locked up or make him give his parole, and that won't do. Jamie wants to know why not, and Tom basically says that John said to get there as quick as he can and get him out. And Jamie rubs his hand over his face. Does he then? Did he suggest how I want to do that? Tom doesn't know, but he says that John believes that Jamie has native wit and ferocity to accomplish it. And Tom will help him. I love that. Native wit and ferocity. I'd say that definitely defines Jamie Fraser. You know, if anybody was going to have to break my ass out of jail, I think Jamie Fraser could do it. And then Tom shows Jamie that he has John's dagger. And Jamie thinks that will definitely be helpful. But then he says, I didn't want to save you both. Oh. But then he tells Tom not to stab anyone unless he tells him to. I didn't want to save you both from the hangman. So now they walked. And it's pouring rain. They're not speaking. The rain is pattering on their head and shoulders. That's it. Shazam. Again, 2 short chapters, but pretty meaty altogether. Now they have to go and try to do a Castle Athlone prison break. I don't know how many castles you've been to, but if they're properly guarded, it's really difficult to get anybody out of there if they're meant to be kept there. Castles purposely are designed to keep people in or out. So they have a job ahead of them. But I have no doubt that dear Tom Bird can be quite helpful to Jamie, and they will get him out. And the fact that John would leave all the planning up to Jamie speaks really of how he thinks Jamie's abilities are so strong and at his smarts. So I can definitely appreciate that too. So next week, we will be looking at chapters 25 and 26. We're getting there. These pages are a bit longer, so expect the next podcast to be probably 45 to 50 minutes. Thank you for following along all these weeks. 12 weeks. We're looking at near on 3 months already. This has been such salve for Droughtlander for me. And to look at these characters, and it's a nice break from my schoolwork and regular work and all the things in life that are of necessity. I love having you along and being able to share how I see this. And this week's vocabulary was fun as usual. It's heady stuff. Even when it seems light, it's really not. The layers are beautifully done here. So I appreciate you greatly. And if this is your first time listening, where might else you find A Dram of Outlander? Well, on Facebook, it's A Dram of Outlander page. There's also a private group just for listeners. That's A Dram of Outlander, but you have to ask to join. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Dram of Outlander with no A in the front. And I post all sorts of pictures that I find. I forward pictures from Matt Roberts and other places. It's good fun on Instagram. And on Twitter, we have our Wednesday night chat. Come on and join us. It is amazing. And we get on little bunny holes and off topic, sometimes talk about personal things. It's about building friendships and community as much as it's talking about the prior chapters from the week's podcast before. The week before's podcast. How do you support A Dram of Outlander? The best thing you can do is share the social media pages, share the website, adramofoutlander.com, share the podcast. It's on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. Tell people about it. I mean, there are all these episodes to go back and listen to, whether it's for the show or if it's about Voyager or now The Scottish Prisoner. You can also support the show by coming and interacting with other listeners, other people on the pages and groups. Come in and join in on the community building. And of course, you can financially support the podcast by going to patreon.com/adramofoutlander. And you can give a small monthly offering if you want, or if you would like to do a one-time offering, just contact me at adramofoutlander@gmail.com. And you can also call into the voice line, 719-425-9444. Leave a voicemail, question, comment, thought. Hey, it could be included in a future podcast. And if you would like to come on the podcast as a guest, leave the voicemail or email me. Again, it's adramofoutlander@gmail.com. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart and from Podcast Cat or Podcat Butterscotch. Slán